Work-wife nightmare caught on camera. The first thing about the warehouse wasn't the noise, it was the rhythm. Beep, scan, slide, lift, repeat. 12-hour shifts turned people into patterns. You could tell who was new by how they moved, too fast, too stiff, too eager, like they were trying to prove something to a building that didn't care. Veterans moved like they were part of the machinery itself, smooth, efficient, quiet. They had learned what the new ones hadn't yet, that the warehouse didn't reward hustle, it rewarded consistency. Hustle burned you out by week 3. Consistency kept your numbers clean for years. Shantavius was one of those. He'd been at the distribution center for 6 years, which in warehouse time was practically a lifetime. People cycled through that place like water through a drain. Seasonal workers, temp to hire people who never got hired, folks who showed up 2 weeks and vanished without notice, leaving their badge on the break room table like a small white surrender. But Shantavius stayed, not because he loved it, not because he couldn't do anything else, but because he was a man who understood the value of stability. And stability in that zip code, with 2 kids in school and a mortgage that wasn't going to pay itself, meant you kept your head down and your numbers up. He kept his earbuds in one ear only, policy, rotating through the same playlist he'd had since his youngest was born. Gospel in the morning, old school R&B after lunch when the energy started dipping, a little trap music in the final stretch of the shift when he needed something with a pulse to carry him across the finish line. He worked his station like a man who had long since stopped thinking about the individual motions and had fused them into something automatic. His hands knew before his brain decided. Married 10 years to a woman named Denise, who worked nights at a medical billing office and kept their household running with the kind of quiet precision that Shantavius deeply respected and tried his best to mirror in everything he did. 2 kids, Marcus, 9, who had his father's stillness and his mother's sharp eyes, and Amara, 6, who had everyone's everything and was entirely her own person already. They lived 40 minutes out in a subdivision that was decent without being fancy, the kind of neighborhood where people waved from driveways and kept their lawns cut and minded their own business. He drove the same black F-150 every day. Clocked in 8 minutes early, never more, never less. Clocked out clean. No drama, no side conversations that ran longer than they needed to, no one's business in his mouth. The kind of man supervisors liked because he didn't need managing, which in a warehouse with 300 employees across 2 shifts was rarer than people realized. And in a place like that, that kind of man stood out. Not flashy, not loud, just steady. The kind of steady that becomes its own kind of gravity. People drifted toward it without knowing why. Keisha noticed within her first 2 weeks. She had transferred from a facility in another county, lateral move, same pay grade, for reasons she kept vague whenever anyone asked. She was mid-30s, sharp-featured, the kind of woman who walked into a room and conducted an immediate silent census. Who mattered, who didn't, who could be useful, who was beneath notice. She landed at the facility with the energy of someone starting fresh, but not in the humble way. In the way of someone who had already decided the new place would be better because they'd be running it within a month. She was charming, genuinely, naturally charming in the way that certain people are, the kind of charm that makes you feel chosen when they turn it in your direction. She learned names fast, remembered details, complimented people specifically, not vaguely. Not, you look nice today, but that color looks incredible on you. It brings out your eyes. She had a memory for what mattered to people and a gift for deploying that memory at moments that felt spontaneous, but probably weren't. Within her first week, she had a table at lunch. Within her second, she had a reputation for being fun. But Keisha was the type who liked attention without asking for it directly. She didn't chase, she positioned. Always in the right place at the right time. Always just a little too close, a little too friendly, a little too intentional. She knew how to make pursuit look like accident, how to make pressure feel like warmth. She'd been doing it long enough that it had become instinct, and instinct is the most dangerous kind of behavior because the person doing it can almost always convince themselves they aren't doing it at all. She clocked Shantavius not because he talked to her, he didn't, but because he didn't. While most of the men on the floor made at least some effort to establish themselves in her orbit, the way men do when a new woman arrives, Shantavius moved through her presence the way you move through a room you've already cataloged. No pause, no additional energy expenditure, no acknowledgement beyond baseline courtesy. He said good morning when proximity required it, and then he went back to work. That alone made him interesting. There's a particular kind of person for whom indifference reads as invitation. Not everyone is like this. Most people, when ignored, simply redirect. But for certain personalities, the person who doesn't respond to the pull becomes the most compelling thing in the room. It's not really about that person at all. It's about the refusal. The refusal becomes a mirror, and in that mirror, they see something they need to correct. Keisha was that kind of person. At first, it was small, reasonable, the kind of thing you couldn't object to without seeming paranoid. Hey, you mind showing me how you got your rate so high? Professional, normal, legitimate question from a new employee to a veteran.
Shantavius nodded without breaking his rhythm. Yeah, it's just pacing. Don't rush the first half of the shift. Burnout'll catch you by hour 8 and your numbers will crater. Short, direct, helpful. The answer of a man who understood that information shared quickly was a conversation ended quickly. He went back to scanning. That should have been it, but Keisha lingered, shifted her weight to one hip, tilted her head at him the way people do when they've decided someone is a puzzle worth solving. Okay, I see you. You one of them quiet ones, huh? He gave a half smile, not a real one, a courtesy one, eyes still on his scanner. Just here to work. That should have been the signal. Eyes on scanner was a universal language in the warehouse. It meant conversation complete. It meant I am doing my job and so should you. It meant approximately 17 different versions of goodbye. But Keisha wasn't looking for signals. She was looking for openings. And when someone is looking for openings, they will find one in almost any response, including silence, especially silence. Over the next few weeks, she constructed a proximity with such gradual precision that it almost didn't register as construction at all. Same break time, just started happening. Same lunch table, slid in one seat over with a tray and a bright "Hey you" that included 2 other people so it couldn't be called out. Same gym, the one he'd gone to for 3 years, 40 minutes from work in the opposite direction from his house, which she had no obvious reason to know about and certainly no reason to appear at. Oh, you come here too? Small world. Same parking lot timing, appearing at her car just as he was getting to his. You leaving already? Long day, right? These shifts are killing me. Coincidence every time. Deniable every time. Each individual instance explainable on its own. It was only the pattern that was damning, and patterns require documentation and memory, both of which most people don't think to maintain in the early stages when everything still feels minor. At first, Shantavius didn't think much of it. Warehouse life blurred people together. Same faces, same shifts, same limited geography. Overlap happened. New people were still finding their footing socially. He gave it the benefit of the doubt, the way a man with clean intentions often does, because clean-intentioned people tend to assume clean intentions in return until the evidence becomes impossible to ignore. But then it shifted. "Don't nobody work like you," she said one afternoon, leaning against the lip of his station while he scanned, close enough that he could smell her perfume over the industrial smell of the floor. "Your wife must be spoiled." He paused just slightly, half a second, just long enough to register that the statement had moved from professional into something adjacent to personal. "She good," he replied, neutral.
A closed door in 2 words. Keisha smiled, slow and deliberate, the smile of someone who had watched the door close and filed away the information about where the door was located. I bet. She pushed off the station and walked away unhurried. That was the first moment something felt off. Not wrong, not yet, just unnecessary. A comment that existed not to exchange information, but to exist, to deposit something, to leave a residue. He wiped his hands on his work pants reflexively, though they weren't dirty. He adjusted after that, started timing his breaks differently, switched stations when it was available, shortened responses to monosyllables when she initiated, became very busy very suddenly whenever she appeared. But avoidance, when someone is determined, doesn't stop the game. It just changes it. It announces to the determined person that you have noticed them, which is itself a form of engagement. And engagement, even negative engagement, is what they were looking for all along. Keisha adapted. She started bringing him things. First time, a bag of chips, holding it out as she passed. Extra snack, I grabbed 2, I don't even know why. Second time, a container of food, actual food, like she'd cooked it, rice and something that smelled like it had been simmered. Made too much last night. Hate to waste it. Third time, fourth time, fifth time. The containers getting a little more elaborate, the offerings framed as afterthoughts. I already had it. It was just sitting there, but appearing with a regularity that afterthoughts don't. Each time he declined, politely, consistently, without anger or drama, because he understood instinctively that anger and drama were what this required to escalate into something she could use. I'm good. No, thank you. I brought my own. And he had. Every day, the same lunch bag from home that Denise packed, even though he told her she didn't have to, because she said she wanted to, because she was that kind of woman and he was that kind of marriage. That should have closed the door. But rejection, when someone's ego is intimately tied to the pursuit, doesn't always land as rejection. I'm good. No, thank you. I brought my own. And he had. Every day, the same lunch bag from home that Denise packed, even though he told her she didn't have to, because she said she wanted to, because she was that kind of woman, and he was that kind of marriage. That should have closed the door. But rejection, when someone's ego is intimately tied to the pursuit, doesn't always land as rejection. It lands as data about the pursuit that needs adjusting. The wrong approach, not a true no, a locked window instead of a locked door, try around back. Keisha took it that way. And then the social environment of the warehouse became weaponized, not by her design exactly, but enabled by her behavior and the bored, entertainment-hungry culture of a place where people spent 12 hours a day looking for anything to make the hours feel shorter. The work husband jokes started creeping in around them. Oh, that's Keisha's man right there. Y'all ain't slick. Warehouse love story, I'm telling you. She feed him every day. That's love. People laughed. It was normal. It was the kind of thing that happened in every warehouse, every office, every place where people spent large portions of their waking lives together and needed social shorthand for the dynamics that formed. Usually it was harmless. Usually it dissolved on its own. But Shantavius didn't laugh. Cut that out, he said once, firm but measured, not loud but carrying. That ain't what this is. He said it to the group. He said it calmly, without performance, with the specific gravity of a man who meant it and wanted it on record that he had said it. People nodded, somewhat awkwardly, said, okay, chill, it's just jokes. Keisha laughed it off for the group, hand-waving, teeth showing, magnanimous as a queen dismissing a fuss. Relax, it's just jokes. He's so serious. Another laugh. A head shake like he was adorably uptight. But her eyes said something else. In the second it took for the laughter to land and her face to resettle, there was something else there. Not amusement, not embarrassment, something tighter. something that in a different lighting might have been called offense. That was the moment he knew. Not fully, but enough. Enough to feel the shape of what this was becoming and to understand that the time for passive avoidance had passed. This required something more active, more deliberate. He pulled back harder after that. No more responses to indirect conversation. No more polite smiles to bridge the space. No more eye contact sustained longer than functional courtesy required. No more shared break rooms if he could get to a different one. He moved through the floor with quiet, deliberate distance, the kind that anyone paying attention could read clearly. And Keisha was paying attention. The moment she registered that the distance was now intentional, not his personality, not distraction, but a choice aimed specifically at her, something reorganized in her. Because there's a particular kind of pride that cannot accept being set aside, that experiences being set aside not as a social cue, but as an act of aggression, and that responds accordingly. Because once someone decides you're supposed to play a role in their story and you refuse, you don't just become unavailable, you become a problem. It started small enough to deny. Boxes placed just slightly out of reach on his station. Nothing you could report, nothing you could prove. Just the mild, cumulative inconvenience of things not being where they were supposed to be in ways that cost you seconds. And seconds in a rate-tracked warehouse were money. Items mis-scanned under his ID when he stepped away from the terminal, a thing that should have been impossible given protocol, but protocol in a busy facility is only as good as enforcement, and enforcement had gaps. The mis-scans were small, a package logged to the wrong category, an item marked as sorted that hadn't been, a discrepancy that looked like user error, a delay in the replenishment of his station supplies that made him walk farther than necessary to resupply. Nothing major. Nothing a supervisor would act on independently. Nothing you could bring to HR and have it taken seriously without sounding like you were either paranoid or deflecting blame for your own declining performance. But the cumulative effect on his rate was real. And in that warehouse, rate was everything. Your rate was your standing. Your rate was your ability to keep a preferred station, a preferred shift, preferred consideration when schedule changes came up. Your rate was a number that floated above your head invisibly and determined how much patience management extended to you when things got complicated. Supervisors started noticing. Your numbers dipped this week, Shantavius. That's not like you. 2 weeks in a row. Everything okay at home? I need you back at your usual level, man. You know you're one of my anchors. He didn't point fingers, not yet. He understood that unsubstantiated accusations in a workplace, especially when the accused party had already begun constructing a social reputation around him, could be turned against him instantly. He'd watched it happen to other men. The man who complained became the difficult one. The man who raised an issue became the man with an attitude. He wasn't going to make that mistake. So instead, he became meticulous in a way he hadn't needed to be before. He started double-checking everything that touched his terminal, logged out every single time he stepped away, even briefly, even for 45 seconds. Created a physical workspace boundary, politely but clearly, that made it harder for anyone to reach his station when he wasn't there. He kept a small, plain notepad in his back pocket and began writing things down. Dates, times, proximity, incidents, not in a dramatic way, just quietly, methodically, the way a man who has understood that documentation is protection maintains a record. And patterns started forming in the record. Keisha's break times, which had no set schedule, consistently aligned with his in weeks 3 and 4 after the lunch confrontation. Her station assignments, which were managed by a floor coordinator who had become friendly with her in the way that certain coordinators became friendly with certain employees, had begun clustering in adjacent zones to his. Her presence was constant in his peripheral vision in a way that, once he started actually tracking it, revealed itself as far beyond coincidence. And then the gym. He had never mentioned his gym to anyone at work, not because it was a secret, but because it wasn't a conversation he'd ever had. Where he worked out wasn't something that came up in the kind of brief functional exchanges that constituted his social life at the facility. He'd been going to that gym for 3 years, a specific mid-range place that wasn't particularly close to anything, sandwiched between a tax place and a cell phone repair shop in a strip mall that you'd only know about if you'd been directed there or lived nearby. He had not invited her there. He had not mentioned it in any form. He had not posted about it anywhere that he knew of. But there she was, on a Tuesday evening, appearing beside the stretch mat with a water bottle and a bright theatrical surprise on her face. "Oh, wow, you come here? I just started coming here. Small world." He looked at her, not with anger, with something more careful, the look of a man who was filing information. "Yeah," he said, finished his stretch, went to his workout, watched from a distance in the mirror the way she positioned herself within sightline of his equipment rotation, never directly approaching, maintaining just enough physical separation to claim coincidence while making presence impossible to ignore. He finished early, left without comment, but now the line was crossed. Work was one thing. Work was a place you were required to be, with people you didn't choose, and you managed it with professionalism and distance as needed. But outside of work, his gym, the place he went to decompress, the 40 minutes he carved out for himself 3 times a week, that was different. That was his. And she had come into it uninvited, without explanation, and with a performance of coincidence that he no longer believed. That night at home, Denise asked about his day. He said long and kissed her on the forehead, and she looked at him a second longer than usual, the way she sometimes did when she knew something was on his mind. And he looked back at her with the same steadiness he always carried, and she let it go because she trusted him the way he trusted her, completely, the way trust is supposed to work. He lay awake for a while after she went to sleep, not afraid, not angry, just thinking, organizing, making decisions. The next day at work, she sat next to him at lunch. Not one seat over with a buffer of social deniability. Next to him, shoulder proximity, close enough that the table would read it as intentional to anyone watching, and people were always watching at lunch because there was nothing else to watch. "You know you doing too much avoiding," she said, opening her container and arranging herself like she was settling in for a long stay. "I'm not avoiding, I'm working." She tilted her head, gave him a patient look, like she was dealing with someone being unnecessarily difficult. "You always working, even on break." He didn't respond to that, took a bite of his food. She leaned in slightly, not dramatically, just the lean of casual intimacy, the kind that looks natural from across the room. "You married, not dead." The table went quiet, not the whole break room, but the immediate table. The 4 people who had been half listening while pretending not to went fully still. He set down his fork, looked at her. When he spoke, it was quiet and controlled and completely without performance, which somehow made it more serious than shouting would have been. "Don't talk to me like that. I got a family. I'm not playing with you. Don't bring this energy around me again." He picked up his tray, stood up, walked away. For a moment, just a single moment before the social recovery kicked in, her face showed what was actually happening inside it. Not embarrassment, not shame, something hard, something that had been insulted, like he hadn't refused her, like he had done something to her. Then the recovery. She leaned back, crossed her arms, rolled her eyes at the table in a way that said, "Can you believe him?" Issued a small performative laugh and said, "Ain't nobody trying to take your little life. Relax." The table laughed, nervously, the way people laugh at tension they don't want to be responsible for. But 2 people at that table didn't laugh, and those 2 people were witnesses. He didn't know that yet, but documentation works in multiple directions, and sometimes other people are keeping records too. That should have ended it, but the calculus changed after that moment, because public rejection, especially witnessed rejection, does something to certain people. It transforms the private injury into a social debt. It's no longer about want. It becomes about face. And protecting face for someone whose sense of self is tangled up in the ability to secure what she pursues can justify almost anything to the part of the brain that handles justification. Keisha turned. The sabotage became less careful. More confident, somehow. The confidence of someone who has decided the risk is worth it, or who has convinced themselves the risk isn't real because they've begun constructing a counter-narrative in advance. His rate dropped again, more sharply this time. A supervisor pulled him aside privately, the kind of aside that had begun to feel less like concern and more like documentation of performance failure, the kind that starts appearing in your file. HR's been getting reports, the supervisor said. He blinked. Reports about what? Unprofessional behavior. A pause, making coworkers uncomfortable. He felt it click into place. Not confusion, not the disorientation of being falsely accused. He had been watching this build. He had been watching the trajectory of it from the moment she sat next to him at lunch, from the moment he saw her at the gym, from the moment he watched her face in that break room after he stood up. He had understood, in the abstract, that this was possible, that when someone's narrative was threatened, they would attempt to rewrite it. But understanding in the abstract and sitting in a supervisor's office hearing your own name attached to accusations is a different experience entirely. Something moved through him that he refused to let out. He breathed through it. He nodded. "I understand," he said. "Do you know what this might be referring to?" "I have some ideas," he said, "and I have documentation I'd like HR to see." The supervisor looked at him for a moment. "Okay," he said, "set that up." HR called him in 2 days later. Small conference room, 2 HR representatives, both with the particular neutral expression of people trained to give nothing away until they need to. Water bottles on the table. A box of tissues that was standard issue in that room and always felt vaguely ominous. "Shantavius, there have been concerns raised about inappropriate workplace conduct, comments that have made a colleague uncomfortable, unwanted attention." He let them finish. He didn't interrupt, didn't get hot, didn't do any of the things that would have shifted the energy in that room against him. He sat with the stillness that had always been his most powerful quality, not passive, not defeated, but present and unmoved. The kind of stillness that forces a room to come to you rather than the other way around. When they finished, he said, "I'd like to share some things with you." He laid out the notepad. Dates, times, incidents, interactions he had witnessed or been part of, logged with specificity. The chip bag, the food containers, the repeated proximity, the gym, the lunch table, the comments she had made, the witnesses, their names, their approximate locations, their proximity to the exchange. He gave them names. 2 names from that lunch table. Then he gave them something else. He asked them, specifically, to review the facility camera footage from 4 identified dates and times, with specific camera zones noted, and to look at proximity and initiation of contact. He asked them to review the scan logs for his terminal, with timestamp analysis for the period in question, specifically looking for access patterns during the 3 to 5 minute windows when he had stepped away from his station. Then he sat back, and he waited. The HR team left the room. He sat there for 14 minutes. He counted. When they came back, something had shifted in their posture in a way that wasn't dramatic, but was readable to someone paying close enough attention. They had looked at something in those 14 minutes, or made a phone call, or reviewed something that had already been flagged somewhere. While there were moments where boundaries could have been more clearly reinforced at an earlier stage of the situation, one of them said carefully, in the measured language of liability management, "We appreciate your thoroughness and your preparation." A reprimand. It was going in his file. He understood that. In cases like this, they almost always put something symmetrical in both files just to cover the institution, and he had made peace with that. A note in a file that he had, in their words, failed to report concerns through proper channels in a timely manner was a paper cut. He could live with a paper cut. What he couldn't have lived with was his name attached to what she had claimed. They thanked him. They asked him to remain available. They showed him out. Keisha's meeting was the following day. He wasn't there for it. He didn't know what was said in that room. He knew only what he observed afterward, which was that by Thursday of that week, she had cleaned out her locker, returned her badge, and was gone from the floor. No announcement, no email, no goodbye lunch, just an absence where her presence had been. The way certain disruptions end, not with a resolution exactly, but with a removal. The floor moved the same the next day. Beep, scan, slide, lift, repeat. People whispered, of course. Warehouses always whisperer. The version that circulated in the break rooms and across headsets during slow stretches was partial and distorted the way secondhand information always is. They said HR got involved over some drama. I heard she was messing with somebody's numbers. He got lucky, honestly. That could have gone different. Messy situation. I don't know all the details. Somebody said she was following him to the gym. That last one made him pause when it reached him third hand, not because it surprised him, but because it meant other people had seen things he hadn't known they'd seen, that his situation had been more observed than he realized, that the witnesses he'd cited weren't the only ones. He didn't engage with any of it. When someone tried to bring it to him directly, he listened politely for 5 seconds and then redirected with, "I don't know the details either," and returned to his scanner. That night, he picked Marcus up from his after-school program and took both kids to get ice cream, even though it was a weeknight, just because he wanted to, just because he could, just because he had earned the specific peace of a normal evening by doing everything right when it mattered. Amara fell asleep in the truck with ice cream on her shirt. Marcus asked him if he was okay. 9 years old, already watching his father like a study. "Yeah," Shantavius said, "I'm good." "You seem different." "Different how?" The boy considered it with the seriousness he brought to most things. Like when a math problem is finally finished. He laughed. A real one. The kind that comes from somewhere you didn't know needed releasing. "That's exactly what it is," he said. At home, after the kids were down, Denise came and sat beside him on the couch, not asking anything, just present in the way she was when she knew he needed weight beside him without needing an explanation. He told her, not everything, but enough. He told her about the months of it, the way he'd managed it, the way it had tried to become something larger, and how he had kept it from becoming that. He told her about the documentation, the HR meeting, the outcome. She was quiet for a moment after he finished. Then she said, "You should have told me earlier." "I know. Not because I wouldn't have trusted you, but because you shouldn't have carried that alone." He nodded. Because she was right. Because the instinct that had protected his job, the quiet self-sufficiency, the internal management of threat, the refusal to escalate prematurely had also kept him isolated in something that had been genuinely heavy. And isolation, even disciplined isolation, has a weight. "Next time," she said. "Next time," he agreed. She leaned her head against his shoulder. They sat there for a while in the kind of silence that doesn't need filling. The real story, he thought, wasn't about a work wife or a work husband, wasn't about attraction or the manufactured intimacy of shared routines. It was about something simpler and older and more dangerous than any of that. It was about a person who had confused the feeling of wanting something with the right to have it, who had mistaken the excitement of pursuit for reciprocity, who, when the reciprocity failed to materialize, had decided that the problem was the person being pursued rather than the nature of the pursuit itself, and who had then, in the specific logic of wounded pride, tried to make the refusal cost him something. Keisha didn't want a relationship. She wanted the feeling, the specific, acute aliveness of being seen by someone who hadn't chosen to look, the break from routine that a complicated situation provides. something to carry through 12-hour shifts and think about and construct narratives around. It was never about Shantavius the man with the F-150 and the packed lunch and the 2 kids who ran to the door. It was about the feeling his unavailability generated and the need to resolve that feeling one way or the other. And when resolution through connection became impossible, resolution through destruction became the available option. She had chosen the wrong person, because Shantavius understood something that most people don't learn until it's too late, until the accusation has already landed and the narrative has already calcified. You don't wait to be falsely accused and then prove your innocence.
You make innocence visible in real time. You document. You maintain. You stay in the light. You give the truth something to point to when it needs pointing. You don't just protect your job. You protect your name. And he had, quietly, carefully, completely, without anger, without theater, without a single moment where he had given the situation permission to make him into something he wasn't. He went back to his station the next morning, earbuds in, one ear, policy, playlist starting with gospel. He looked at his station, the scanner, the belt moving, the rhythm that had been here before him and would be here after. Beep, scan, slide, lift, and go home. To his kids, to his wife, to the life he had built and guarded and refused to let anyone take from him without a fight. Not a loud fight, not a dramatic fight, but the quiet, thorough, irrefutable kind. The only kind that actually wins.